Right, I'm Sue, and I'd like to tell you about Devie. This is my little Devie dog. She was a West Highland Terrier that my mum and dad bought for me when I was about 5. And we were up in Scotland on an RAF base, and my mum and dad thought that they would buy me a companion, a little companion, because mum was pregnant and they were going to have a baby, and perhaps all the attention would then go to the baby. So they would buy me a little Devie dog. She was we're going to call her Devie after the river Devie in Scotland. Anyway, we went to this posh place where all the little bundles of puppydom were all bundling around in a wide enclosure, all these little white little things. And my mum and dad were at one end talking to the owners, and I pottered off down the enclosure, and this little white person came pottering after me and wanted to know, you know, who I was and everything, and so I put my fingers through the netting, and she licked them. Well, I mean, that was it. That was absolutely it. So I said, Mom and Daddy, please can I have, in my normal subtle fashion, please can I have this one, this one. And so Devie came home with us, and she lived with us while I was, you know, growing up. But it wasn't long after we got her, and we never had her spayed, so that she went on heat regularly. And mum and dad said, do never take her out while she is on heat. But I was very young and I didn't quite understand. So I took her out while she was on heat. And I was walking along with my little white bundle at the end of the lead, and a big black dog on a lead came past with 3 men, and he raped her. And I was desperately upset, and I couldn't get her away, and I was crying and shouting and calling for help and said, please, please. And they laughed. 3 men laughed and said, you'll never get her off, you know, just wait until they've finished. And that stayed with me. I'm now 75, for the last 70 years, about how you can be raped and men can find it funny. Anyway, so she lived with us, and for the next 10 years or so, and then unfortunately again the same thing happened, and she died with a dead puppy inside her. And I cried my heart out. Anyway, so just to say that Devie now lives with us in our house, and we have other pictures of little Devie dogs around the house because she brought so much joy and companionship and love to me when I was a child.
It's had blank pages, beautiful blank pages. There's still, let's see, more than 100. So I thought such a beautiful book has to have a special purpose. Now, I've had difficult times in my life, but I've been helped all through my life by literature, by poems, and also by novels, and sometimes helped by wonderful things that I've heard. So sometimes I think that's something that I would like to enter into my, it's called Book of Quotations. So I've about filled, I've still got, I haven't even filled it halfway yet. But in here are quotations from Shakespeare, of course, and also from my favorite novel writer, Emily Bronte, also from the latest one that I entered. Suddenly just occurred to me was a short poem by Shelley. And I entered it because it was the 200th anniversary of the death of John Keats, who again is one of my favorite, sounds a bit trivial, one of the poets that I get the most out of. And so that seemed an appropriate day to enter this poem in this book. And yeah, sometimes for reasons that I won't say now, I had difficulty expressing my emotions, and sometimes I kept a lot of emotions frozen inside me. And sometimes when reading, suddenly I would read something and that would melt, that would thaw those emotions. For example, there are passages in George Eliot, which even now I can't read without crying. I know that I'm going to cry even before I start to read them, but it's not a painful crying. It's a release. I've often appeared cheerful, I know him. And I usually am cheerful, but there are moments when I'm not cheerful, but then I prefer to then cry by myself, which isn't something bad, I don't think. I'll sort of sit with one of my passages and read it, and experience the emotion through literature. So I write myself, but just I haven't ever published anything. But I'm grateful to all the people who have written in the past, because great writers, they can give us so much. And here's my book, and I also found out that Anne Frank, who I also feel some sort of affinity to, as I live quite close to the Anne Frank house here, and also because my father was Jewish, she also kept a book of quotations. So when I found that out, that was a good feeling too. And it's a beautiful book by my friend, who's very precise in everything she does, unlike me. And I'm glad Anne's ringing the bell, because I could go on for a long time, but I think I've said enough. So thank you for listening.
Over her life, if she would leave him to me in her will, never thinking that she would. Anyway, apparently she did. And when, after she had passed away, her solicitor said to me, there's one line in her will which says, Diana to take charge of Mr. Fisher. The solicitor thought that Mr. Fisher was a human being and said to me, will you need funds to look after him? And so I said, no, that won't be necessary. He insisted and said, I don't want you to be out of pocket. And I assured him that I could manage. So I said afterwards to my friends, how could I possibly tell the solicitor that Mr. Fisher was a soft toy? I've been told to be brief, so I shall be brief.
Is a piece of wire which has, it looks like a piece of knitting. I don't know if you can see that. This was made by my grandfather, whose name was Alfred Grattan Lee, and he was born in 1888 in Huddersfield, as I was, and he married my grandmother Nellie. And I used to have to go and visit him and Nellie every Sunday with my parents, with whom I lived. I also lived with my maternal grandparents. Grandpa Lee, as I called him, he was very handy. He had a car when nobody had a car, probably because he'd been the chauffeur dispenser for a doctor in Huddersfield in the days before the health service. It's very disconcerting watching this when I can see Sue and Anne and I can't see myself or anyone else. But he died under very tragic circumstances in 1966. And I got the message that he had died and that my grandmother was very ill in hospital. I got the message in the middle of doing my biology homework, which was the life cycle of the rabbit. And I can remember it as if it were yesterday. But after he died, his house was cleared and Grandma never went back to live in the house. She never recovered fully. She died about 3 months after him. But one of the things that my father managed to rescue from the house clearance were several of these. Now this one has got 3, 6, I think this one has got 10 loops. I think the smallest one I ever saw had 5. The largest one I ever saw had 15. And all you have to do, if I turn it that way, you might be able to see that this is a loop of wire. All you have to do is get the rings off the handle, if you like. And you do that by this method of taking off alternate ones, and then you have to put one on. And I've been doing this since I was about 7, I would say. There's one method of doing it if you've got an odd number of loops, and a different method if you've got an even number. I can never remember which method that is. I've never seen anything like this ever. I only have 2 of them left and they're both the same length. Give me time and I can do them. I can get all the loops off and then put them all back on again. But it's one of the few things I have as a memory of my grandpa. He was a big man with a big fat stomach. And when I was a little girl, he used to sit on the rocking chair and I used to sit on the rocking chair too, on his big fat stomach with my feet on the rocking chair. And that's my story.
I'm Susan Ledley, and this Farrow's toffee tin was one that my mother kept her needles and pins in, and sewing scissors and a thimble. And I inherited after she died in 2004. And I use it, and it helps me feel close to my mum. And it reminded me today, picking it up, that she taught me dressmaking skills. We had sewing lessons at school. I was useless. We used to do these horrible samples of things, smocking, and mine always looked grubby and puckered. But my mum was a very patient teacher, you know, with the dressmaking. She was wonderful at sewing and knitting and embroidery. And she'd learned her skills from my grandmother, who was a dressmaker in Nottingham. And my grandmother had brought up 8 children. She was widowed in 1919 because my grandfather had contracted Bright's disease in the trenches during World War I. And he died at home, and they had a military funeral, and he has a military grave at Nottingham, which I've not visited yet, but I will do. And I've always felt this loss of this grandfather. And in 1979, I started studying an Open University course, the Arts Foundation course. And one of the things we were studying was the war poets. And I came across the poems of Wilfred Owen. And they had quite an effect on me, because they're very moving, but also I felt or sensed his anger at the politicians at the time, and these, men whose lives were wasted during the First World War, the awful carnage. Thereafter, when it was Remembrance Day, and ever since, I've always worn a red poppy in remembrance of my granddad, but also a white one, the peace poppy. And I have a commemorative, I guess you'd call it a plaque, for my grandfather, that says that he died for honour and freedom. Well, Wilfred Owen said there was no glory and honour in dying in war, and I think I've always kind of carried that. Yeah, this is part of who I am, and read, even today, if I read Wilfred Owen poems, I actually end up in tears. Just find it deeply moving.
Right, this is a little plastic plaque of the SS Uganda, that steamship Uganda. It was used from the 1960s onwards as a schoolboy cruise ship. It had ordinary seagoing passengers as well, but most of the passengers were school children. Nowadays it doesn't happen, which is a terrible shame, because at the time I thought I was lucky to have the opportunity to participate in 2 school cruises around the Mediterranean. But looking back now, I think I was more than just lucky. I think I was really privileged, because it doesn't happen nowadays. We were lucky. We went on 2 cruises. I've still got the logbooks. I went on 1 cruise in 1969, and I went on another cruise in 1975. And don't know if you can see that we did a little map of all the destinations we went to around the Mediterranean. On the 2nd cruise, we went to Lisbon in Portugal, Vigo in northern Spain, and Tangier. That's when I was only 10 years old. And now if you think of a group of school children going around a Middle Eastern country on their own, it just wouldn't happen. The health and safety, it wouldn't be allowed nowadays. But we were going around Tangier in groups of 3 or 4 pupils, and they just said to us, get back on the boat before 3 o'clock or you'll be left here and have to make your own way back to England. So we were 10 years old. So it wouldn't happen now. So when I was 10 and I went on this cruise on this ship, my mum and dad paid for me, and it was £50 for 10 days. And then when I had the opportunity again, when I was 16, to go on another cruise on the same ship, it was £107 then. And my mum and dad said, no, I'm not going to pay for you again. We've already paid for you once. If you want to go again, you'll have to get a Saturday job and pay for it yourself. So I did that. And this ship, it's got a very iconic storyline to it, as well as being a school cruise ship, because I don't know if any of you remember, back in the early 1980s, there was the Falklands War, and it was requisitioned as a hospital ship. And its normal livery, the British India livery, a white ship with a black and white funnel, it was replaced with the livery of a hospital ship with a red cross, and it was used in the Falklands War. Sometime after that, the school cruises, they became unmanageable. They were too expensive, and it didn't happen anymore. There was a sister ship to the Uganda called the Nevasa, and that was scrapped. And then in the end of the 80s, the Uganda was scrapped as well, because it wasn't possible to do the school cruises anymore. A group of people tried to save the Uganda from the scrapyard and to keep her as a memorial, a museum. I went to see in Falmouth that she was laid up for a while before she was sent to the scrapyard. They tried to raise some money to preserve her, but they couldn't raise enough funds. But I think she had a good innings, because she was used as a school cruise ship, a troop ship, a passenger liner. So I think she did very well, as ships do. You know, they all either end up at the bottom of the ocean, or they end up at the scrapyard eventually. So that's my story of the SS Uganda. But there was repercussions later in my life because of this ship, because we'd stopped at Tunisia as one of our ports, and I always liked Tunisia because of that. When my daughters were teenagers, and they said to me, oh, one year, they said, where should we go for our summer holidays? And I said, oh, Tunisia would be a good idea, because I went there on a school cruise in 1975. And they said, oh, all right then. So we went to Tunisia 3 years running, and they really liked it. And then the third year we went, my daughter met her future husband, and I've now got 2 Tunisian grandchildren, aged 10 and 12. So I was thinking, if I hadn't gone on this cruise, I wouldn't perhaps have 2 Tunisian grandchildren. So that's my story of the SS Uganda and how it's affected me in my life.
Is my fountain pen, and I always feel a little bit old-fashioned, because I feel like I should be writing on a laptop, and it just, try as I might, it just doesn't feel the same. So I've got folders and folders of pieces of scrap like this, with various poems and articles and this, that and the other. So my plan was to read you all a poem. And I do a lot of funny, silly poems, laughing at men and sex and that sort of thing. But I also do things that are particularly for women, and it's Women's Week, so here we are. And I'm really pleased, actually, that the 2 people before me have both been quite deeply touched and found poetry helpful. Because you're never really sure if anyone wants to hear your poems or not. So it's quite nice that we do have 2 poem appreciators in the group today. But what I found was, when I get up and read publicly a funny poem, it's always very well received. But what I actually really want to do is, I want to be brave, and I want to start writing about the really naff things in life, the things that people don't talk about. And I often feel that when you try and do that, it's almost like you're seeking sympathy. And it kind of, I don't know, it doesn't sit right. So, but at the same time, I felt for a long time that if I didn't do that, that I wasn't being true to myself, because like a lot of us in the room, my life's not always been that great. So I ended up writing a poem about that subject, about how I want my sort of sadder poems to just be received, not necessarily responded to. So this one's called If I Weep. If I weep as I speak of my story, pause before you rush to comfort me. If I tell you of myself as a child, my tears are for her, the child, not this grown-up woman who stands before you. If I weep as I talk of my unborn child, my tears are for the young woman, starkly alone in a white, bright hospital bed, not the mother and grandmother before you. If I weep when I tell you how far I've walked, my tears are for that woman, the woman with the aching back and the worn out feet, not this long distance traveller before you. If I weep when I read you my story, do not rush to comfort me. Let me take you as an entertainer would, along with me, together, soul to soul. Silence can hold us, still. Only then will we both know the true meaning of comfort. I do have one more, about the same length. I don't know how I'm doing for time. Okay, so this one is kind of in mind with Mother's Day, just in order to help me choose a couple of poems. It's Mothering Sunday tomorrow. So this one is about my inner child and what she would say to me. So it's kind of my child guiding me as an adult. And it's called Take Me by the Hand. Take me by the hand, show me what it looks like to gaze in a mirror and like who I see. Take me by the hand and lead me confidently through the nettles, nettles that sting through white knee-high socks but go unnoticed through adults' denim. Take me by the hand, hold on tightly as you voice your thoughts, the one I'd gripped and held so close. Fly free, I know I am safe. Take me by the hand, while together we dare to tread the paths that I dare not venture on my own. Beside you, they just become an adventure. Take me by the hand, show me pictures of the woman I will grow into one day, a woman who will define herself. Take me by the hand as I moisten your shoulder with tears, tears that usually just get wiped away, tears that roll from sparkling eyes. Take me by the hand when I see my stabilizers have gone and I wobble gleefully on two wheels. This girl can cycle alone. Take me by the hand as I learn about risks, as I learn that failure too means success, because it means I dared to try. Take me by the hand as we slip invisibly amongst mourners who weep because they miss me, not because they can't stand alone. Take me by the hand as we stand by my grave. Show me the memories I've created. Show me before I die that I have truly been born.
I'm Ronnie, and I want to introduce you to Jessica. Now, Jessica, as you can see, is a doll, and she's one of those old-fashioned porcelain dolls. She's got rather a beautiful face, and her hair, this is her original bonnet, her hair is auburn, and it's real hair. It's actually real hair, which is quite, these dolls always had real hair. And Jessica is German. She was made in Germany, and I think she was made about 1912. She was my mother's doll, so she is a link with my mother. And I think my mother was given her probably about 1922, when she was about 9 years old, 10 years old. She was given Jessica by her mother, I suppose. And Jessica, I'll just show you first. She's got on the back of her head the sign of the maker. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see the Jewish star? Well, I think in these German companies that made the dolls, and there were over 100 firms in Germany in the late 1800s and early 1900s who made these dolls, because there was a lot of clay in an area called Thuringia, and that's where all these factories were. And if they didn't make the dolls, they actually made the heads, and other companies made the dolls. But this one, written on the back with the star, and I think a lot of the companies were Jewish. This one is Simon and Halbig, and it was one of the top 5 companies in Germany that made these dolls. Well, Jessica must have been around with my mother, and when I was 8 years old, I was given Jessica as a birthday present. And my mother had had her restrung because all her strings inside that held her together had rotted or they'd gone. And she sent her apparently to a doll factory where Jessica was restrung, and they broke one of her fingers off. That happened at the doll factory, or at the doll hospital, my mother always said. Well, what happened, I got a lot of pleasure out of Jessica. She's actually wearing the original, or partly the original clothes that my mother had on her. And my mother would have made her clothes, and my mother's sisters possibly. And she's got about 3 layers, and they're all original. And there's great big holes in the fabric because they're so old. And, you know, she's over 100 years old. It's quite amazing. But what happened was, when I left New Zealand, where I was born, and this doll must have gone in a shipment to New Zealand, on a ship, I suppose, before my mother got her. And I left her behind. I left New Zealand when I was 20, and I left her in a box. I had some books, I had a few things, and I had Jessica and Teddy. And I was very lucky because I've got 3 older sisters, and my mother must have decided that if she'd given Jessica to them, they would have fought and said, why didn't I get her? Why did she get her? So she waited. There was a big gap before me and my twin were born. And so she waited, I think, to give Jessica to me, I was very lucky. My sisters didn't get her. But what happened, I didn't go back to New Zealand, and my mother died soon after I came to England. She died of cancer. And I thought, oh, I wonder what's happened to my things. And I didn't go back to New Zealand for 13 years because I didn't have much money and had no reason to go back, because my father had died as well soon after my mother. I was only 21 when my mother died. And eventually in 1979, I went back. And I said to someone in my family, oh, do you know what happened to my stuff? Because the house had been sold a long time before. And they said, oh, Auntie Olive's got your things in her caravan. And my Auntie Olive, who used to make clothes for Jessica, Auntie Olive was what they called a spinster aunt, because she'd never married. And she used to be lovely, and she'd knit clothes for Jessica. Anyway, she was still alive. And I went to see her and I said, well, where are my things? And she said, oh, they're in the caravan behind the house. And the caravan was this rickety old thing. Okay, I'll just finish. The caravan was this rickety old thing, and the mice had got into Jessica's clothes, and that's why some of her hair is missing. Anyway, I brought Jessica back in my hand luggage on an aeroplane because I thought I've got to keep Jessica. She's the only link with my mother. And Teddy, who was about 50 years old, and he was rotting, and he always sat with Jessica in my room. Teddy came back as well, and he had one eye and one leg and one ear. And I had Teddy until 4 years ago, and he was so rotten and his straw was falling out. I cremated him in the garden. I couldn't put Teddy in a bin, so I burnt him and did a little ceremony in the garden in France. So that's the story of my doll.
This shuttlecock is 61 years old this month. And it has a story with me. In 1952, I started playing badminton, and I took to it quite well. I was already playing tennis and golf, but anyway, I won my first prize, a little cup, when I was 12. Now, that was 1952. And then when I was 14, I went to Montreal to play in the Junior Canadian Championships. I don't remember how well I did, but it was a real experience. That was 1955. Then in 1956, I went to play in the Junior Canadian Badminton Championships in Calgary, and I came runner-up. Then in 57, I went to play in Kingston, Ontario, and I won the tournament. Then in 58, I went to Victoria, British Columbia, and won in 1958, 57, 58. I went to Quebec City in 59 and won in 59. And in 1960, my last year of playing junior badminton, I won in Winnipeg, my hometown. That was a really exciting experience. I lost my first game, and it's always best of 3 games. I lost my first game, managed to win the last 2 in the Winnipeg arena, which was very difficult to play in, because in badminton halls, you have green walls and you have an idea how the shuttle is moving in the space. But in an arena with no back or sides, it was a really different experience. And this is the shuttle that I won my 4th Canadian Badminton Championship, and it's still a record in Winnipeg.